Welcome. We want to welcome you on behalf of the concerned clergy to the third of our three-part series. We've done a series on education. Just last week, we did a series on gun violence. And today, for our final series, we're talking about the intersection of mental health and religion. We are so excited to have with us here on today for our chat. First, we have Ms. Teresa Telesco, who is a Stanford Public School psychologist. Thank you so much for joining us on today. Then we have Ms. Shalon Ford, who is here on behalf of Stanford Cradle to Career and is the owner of Wonderfully Made You Counseling. Then last, we have Ms. Jody Pulliam, the Director of Health for the City of Stanford. Thank you each for joining us on today. We're looking forward to our discussion. As we begin our discussion, I want to first recognize the City of Stanford. We're able to do this through a generous grant through the City of Stanford in order to reach our residents. So we want to thank Mayor Simmons and her office for the grant and the ability to be able to do this. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Bush so we can get started. He will be our moderator on today. But before I do that, I would be remiss if we did not thank Bishop Hinton for allowing us the use of his space. Amen. Amen. And then we also want to recognize Apostle Streeter, who is here. Amen. Amen. So good to see you, and the other concerned clergy who are not here yet. But thank you again. Without further ado, here's Pastor Bush.
Good evening, friends and family and community. We are so delighted to be with you today. For those who are in this space physically with us today, we're grateful to have you in with us. There may be others who are still yet coming in. And of course, for all of you who are joining us virtually, we want to welcome you to this space as well. And today we're sharing in something that is, I think, well deserved to be discussed, because we find ourselves in so many distresses these days. Many of us who live with certain skin colors, should I say, we have already over history had distress. And when you compound that with pandemics and I guess more intense racial issues and concerns, these stresses continue to go up. And today we want to talk a little bit about how we can work with those stresses, and particularly from the angle of our mental health, our sense of well-being. You know, the church usually talks about the first and great commandment, that we love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our mind. And the piece that sometimes we don't get to talk much about is what it means to love God with our mind. And what is a healthy mind? What is a healthy psyche, soul, so to speak? There are different ways to talk about all of that. And so today we're going to talk about what we call the intersection of mental health and religion. And so I want to say to our panel first, we are delighted to be with you and hope to have a wonderful conversation. And for those of you who are watching us, we will at some point receive questions or your comments that we are able to do at some point in the time together. And so we will proceed. I have some questions by script. The panel is becoming familiar with, but we are not necessarily bound by the script. So there may be some areas where we may need to talk more, and the panel may choose to say more about some things. Okay, so I'd like to begin. I'm going to begin navigating with the first question is to help us understand first the distance between mental health and mental illness. Because sometimes I notice that we tend to use those terms interchangeably. And I'm just wondering about that. Okay? Anybody who's going to start with it?
So I took great pause when I read that first question. The distance between mental health and mental illness, and maybe the distance is not as great as we'd like to think. So mental health basically entails our ability to cope. So physically, emotionally, cognitively, we all have coping strategies, and mental illness is really that place where we've overtaxed those coping strategies that we have, and we're stuck. And there are many reasons why that happens. Sometimes they're biochemical, sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're circumstantial, sometimes they're environmental, sometimes they're pandemic related and illness related.
Okay. I'm not sure if any other wanted to say anything about that, but that I found that to be helpful. So when we talk about mental health, we're talking about our ways of coping. And when we are looking at mental illness, or when we're using that, it deals with the aspects of us that are challenged, or our coping is challenged for whatever reason. And so I like that. That can give us a little place to launch and to begin some further discussions. Okay, so what makes mental health concerns so difficult to open up about? Because sometimes this has been a silent subject in many of our houses of worship, and sometimes in our families and communities, we don't talk about it. What makes it so hard to?
So there could be many reasons that make it so difficult to open up. One, it could definitely be cultural, because for many cultures, seeing that you are having some struggles, you could be looked down upon. You could be looked at as weak. You could also be looked at as probably someone that you shouldn't be associated with. It could also be that it's cultural, but almost religious, where you're not praying enough, or you haven't sought Jesus enough. And that could be another reason. Shame and guilt are huge in why we don't open up about our mental health. And the cultural aspect is really big. One shift that I have seen since the pandemic, but even a little before, is the generation that's, I don't even know the generation, what it's called now, but they talk about it so much in high school, in junior high. They talk about their feelings. They talk about how they're dealing with something. They talk about having counselors and therapists and whatnot. But there's a generation that's probably the boomers. No, we can't talk about that. We don't talk about that. It's a hush-hush subject. And so that stigma that has been attached to it for so long, I'm seeing that it is being released, but there's still always some reason for someone not being able to discuss it. She talked about reasons for having these mental illness, for dealing with mental illness. And one of them is situational, where trauma could be one of the big issues. And if you let someone know that you've had some type of trauma experience, then you could really be looked down upon as, ooh, well, why did they let that happen to them? Or why was their life like this? And so now you're looked at as less than. So I think that there are lots of reasons why, but those are just a few. But there's always hope that, this stigma attached to not being able to open up about what your struggles are, what you're dealing with, that it's really becoming, it's going away, because we're having conversations like this now, and we're talking about it, and we're opening up more. And I can tell you that a lot of my colleagues, my clinical colleagues, are just overwhelmed with people trying to get in. I don't know if that's your testimony now, but and that's a great thing. It's a great thing because people are reaching out for help.
So my background isn't really mental health. I'm public health and more clinical physical health. But what I used to think or say, what I would say to folks or say to a parent to parent, is sometimes people will deny themselves taking care of their physical health, let alone their mental health. But if it was your spouse or your child or your friend, and it was a physical ailment, like they needed diabetes medication or cancer treatment or something, you had no qualms about saying, of course, you need help, but we have to think about mental health that way as well. You wouldn't deny that to someone if it was physical. So we shouldn't, because it's a mental challenge.
I'd like to add to that. I think that whenever you have a physical ailment, you are more likely to have some sort of mental struggle that goes along with that. So we really can't compartmentalize and say there's a mental health issue, there's a physical health issue. Mm-hmm. And you did mention trauma. We carry trauma around in our bodies. And the unfortunate thing about trauma is that I bet you every person in this room and probably every person hearing can list at least one or two traumas that they've lived through as children or young adults, whether they realize it or not. And you carry that in your body. So it presents later on in life in terms of physical ailments, and you carry it around in your emotions and in your thoughts. And so, it's important to realize that the physical leads to the psychological and vice versa.
And I like how you said that you can't compartmentalize it, because we're all one. You can't say that it's just physical, it's just mental. It's all there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about how much the mental health is embodied in who we are. It's still a physical person to some degree, and so I like that kind of holistic approach to understanding ourselves. I understand how medicine kind of distinguishes between the different aspects of our bodies and the denominations. You have somebody that's working on the head, somebody working on the heart, this kind of thing. But the reality is we're a whole person. And when we get, when this part of us get challenged, and as you say, like if our coping is off, a lot of things could be off, you know, the sleeping, the eating and everything. And so I like what I'm hearing there. I was thinking a little bit about the vulnerability that you started with. You mentioned a couple of feelings like shame and guilt and stuff like that. The vulnerability that comes with, I guess, broaching our weaknesses, and particularly when we start talking about I'm not coping like I'm supposed to, I'm not measuring up like it's almost like it's a confession of sorts, and how difficult that can be sometimes, and we've all had to find the value of what we consider confession, so to speak. I need help. I need, and to just say that is important. And so I want to kind of just honor the vulnerability in that.
You know what, Yolanda mentioned something also about faith, and religion and faith can actually serve to build resilience, or it can bring us down. Because if being a good Christian means that I'm not going to be depressed or anxious, then guess what happens when I'm depressed and anxious? I'm not a good Christian. God must not be happy with me. And so it could have a negative effect. On the other hand, the way religion and faith is presented can also produce resilience, right? If I believe that there is a God who loves me in spite of my weaknesses, then I know that he's, you know, that Papa God who's there to help me and not to condemn me. So I think that there's a dual relationship there with religion. I once heard a preacher say, he looked out in the congregation and he said, you know, there are a lot of people here that look like they've been sucking on lemons. And at first I'm thinking, okay, maybe, you know, they should all be happy. And then I'm thinking, I'm not sure how that made them feel. They're probably here, they're depressed, they might be anxious about life in general, and they were just shamed, right? So instead of approaching, you know, religion from a perspective where it can build you up, that was almost tearing them down. So I agree with you that faith and religion can either be a positive or a negative.
And we have to be very careful for those of us that have influence in that arena, that we're able to reconcile that, you know what, it's okay to have a little worry sometimes. You know, it's okay that you are depressed. You know, it's okay, and we can get help. You know, it's okay to seek out that help. Because if you were in a crisis, and like you referenced, if you were in a crisis and you were having a heart attack at that moment, you would want somebody to reach out for help, call 911 and get you to the doctor. Well, if you're in a crisis and you're having a mental crisis, and you know you're deeply depressed or overly anxious or whatever the issue may be, that you would want someone to help you. You would want someone to say, can I help you? Or even you feeling like I have the freedom to reach out for help. And so those of us who are in the arena of mental health, or even those who are clergy, or if you're on staff at a church, or even a leader in the church, that we're able to really say that it's okay. I've seen T-shirts that say, I have a therapist and Jesus, you know, and it's okay to have both, you know. So I love talking with those of us who are in church, because for so long, it's been a shift. It's been an attitude of, no, you can't, you shouldn't. But now there's a better shift now that's saying that, yeah, it's okay that you're over here. We can help you. We can get you some help. It's okay. So I'm very encouraged. I said this before. I'm very encouraged to see this shift, especially in the church.
I think it's important to recognize people's feelings. And I know how, listening to how my children talk to their children, it's more, I know you're feeling this way now, but, and then go on from there, and just a recognition of how it's important. I think we all can do that with our friends and neighbors.
And I find that to just be more tender and caring of the other when we are open enough to hear and listen to people. And that's where we find where people are going through something. And so, so I really appreciate this part of the discussion that you kind of begun the navigation of how we, I guess, talk about religion in this context today. Religion as it intersects the mental health piece. And we are aware that there may be people who are watching us who may not necessarily be Christian or even practice religion in the way that we talk about it or think about that. But at the same time, we want to open that idea and concept of religion. It may be not just our faith, it could be our spirituality. And spirituality gets a little bit complex because we live in a day now where there is both, spiritualities that seem a little secular to those of us who are, let's say, churchgoers. But there's still spirituality for others, and how they make meaning. And everybody doesn't make meaning the same way. And so what we wanted to make sure of is that as we are talking about that intersection, is whatever that path is for each of us, that path ought to help us to be whole. And instead of hindering our coping and our ability to be our best self, so to speak. And so I appreciate you getting us started with that, because we while we are a coalition of churches, we are aware that our invitation is broad, and we've cast the net to invite as many as we can in this discussion. And so thank you for that. Any response or reaction to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there really is a big role that a church or synagogue or whatever your practicing religion is has in counseling. I think that research shows that the first point of contact for most people that are actively involved in some religion or faith is their church. Or their synagogue. So they're most likely to go to a rabbi or to a pastor or to a priest. That would be their first point of contact. So there really is an important role there to be played. Many times people from different cultures are really hesitant to seek out mental health services. And a lot of it has to do with their cultural background, but they're more likely to trust someone who's faith-based.
Yeah, and you make a very good point, because we know that therapy is built on relationships, and that first point of contact is usually for those who would not make an appointment with a counselor or a psychiatrist. Their first point of contact is their priest, their rabbi, their pastor, their youth minister, and that was something that I definitely brought up in our Stanford Youth Mental Health Alliance that we've just formed to try and combat some of this with our youth here in Stanford. And we decided that we needed to train those people who are out here with the people, because it's not just the clinicians that are able to touch everyone who has a need. It's everyone in the community that needs to touch everyone in the community. So, having trainings on mental health, and we just did a mental health first aid training with the Concerned Clergy Coalition, and they brought some of their leaders from the church, and it was a great success because we were there to basically deputize them and say, okay, now we can't be there, but your people that are coming into your office with these struggles or with whatever concerns they have, now you go and help them try and deal with whatever they're dealing with, because we understand that a lot of our religious leaders are not clinicians. We understand that their study is religion and it's not mental health. And so we wanted to prepare them as best we could to help them. So it is something that I think that all of our community influencers really need to have a grasp on in order to help those who are in our community, because this is such a huge issue. And I think Jody was talking about, we're dealing with a couple of pandemics now, and the mental health pandemic is something that's been here, but it's just gotten bigger over the past couple of years. But that this is something that everyone in the community has to play a part in. And it's not just that person or that person, because in real life, you may see these statistics, but I bet that every one of us has someone or knows someone or is that person who is dealing with a struggle right now. And you may not know it, but we all know someone, or we are that person that's dealing with something. And so it's a community effort that has to happen.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking about how important it is for our faith communities and the places where we find support to become familiar with this as best we can. I remember when I first started as a clergy in a congregation, and that's been a good while back, maybe day before yesterday. And I remember sitting in a seminar that was looking at addiction and substance abuse. And I remember when they was sharing with us about alcoholism, and I said, oh, I don't have none of that in my congregation. And part of it was because I didn't know what to look for. And it took me a while to study. And once I learned some of the things to look for, well, wow, I was sitting with things I didn't know. And so in this way, just talking about this, helping us to see some of what those stresses may be, and when people are not at their best, and when people are under the stress, what are some of the things that is powerful as a clergy for me, and I'm sure.
Right, and the desire that you all have to learn and to try to help has spurred on our work through the Mental Health Alliance to make sure that there's more trainings available and more talk in the community, and providing everyone with the skills, everyone that touches families and children, to be able to help effectively.
I see many students that are high school age. And when someone comes in to talk to me and I know that they're attached to a youth group, I feel like there's someone who has my back, because now you know that they're being supported in school, they're being supported at home, and then when they're going to church, they're attached to a group, whether it's a church or whatever their faith community is, they're attached to another group of people. So it's different layers of support that they have. I think it's really important to go out there and to train youth leaders on what to look for.
So it sounds like we've been talking a little bit about some of the gifts that, let's say, religion provides us with when it comes to mental health and well-being and so on. I would wonder if you all could talk a little bit about any hazards that we need to be mindful of with religion. Like I think when you were talking, Yolanda, you kind of say sometimes we look things like, I done prayed and it's over, it's done, I'm never gonna worry about it again. And that's not really how life happens. And so I was just wondering, any thoughts about where we need to be mindful with religion?
So with parenting, one of the rules of thumb is that unless you have a relationship with your child, that rules are only going to breed rebellion, right? And so I think that we need to be mindful that if you come from a faith and you approach it from a legalistic perspective, that you have the rules and you don't have the relationship, and it's going to have a negative effect. So that someone's vision or view of who God is, or clear vision of their faith and how that supports them or guides them is really important. Otherwise, it can be condemning, it can bring shame and guilt, right? Because no one can live up to all of the rules that we have. So I think it's the manner in which it's presented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I go back and I reemphasize that our religious leaders have, and religious influencers have such a key role to play in this. Because if you are one who's saying that it's okay that you're struggling with this, we can work together to get help, or you know what, you need to go pray about that some more, or you're not praying enough, or you're not coming to church enough, and you're not tithing enough, or you're not. If we are the attitude that we're showing, the attitude that we are giving to people, even allowing for people to express themselves, to express their emotions. If we're not able to do that, on our religious leaders and influencers. So we've got to be very careful with the messaging that we do give out. The lemon, sucking on the lemon, right? We have to be very, very careful with that. I know I tell my husband a lot, because he talks to a lot of people, he's in front of a lot of people, and I talk to him about some things that he says, and come back and I'll say, well, you know what, maybe you could have said it a little differently this way, or you know what, how about saying it this way instead? Just because your words are very, very influential, and people are listening to everything and taking in everything. And so messaging and language is so important.
Yeah, I'm just, there's so much going on in me as I hear both of you talk about the power of, let's say, clergy, leaders, religious leaders, and so on, the influence that we have, and I also hear this part about how significant relationships are to make something happen. And it gets to me and down into the authority thing. You know, I once heard a way of talking about authority was looking at it's kind of like holding an egg, and if it's held too tight, obviously we know what's going to happen, and if we don't hold it well enough, we know what can happen. And so what I'm hearing you say is it is a nice balance there in our work with people, and you can't come off too heavy-handed and just have to understand people. And I think that's very important on the journey, because many of us have, at least I have, and I might be a generation, ahead. Well, many of us remember feeling, let's say, I was beat down when I went to church, or I was beat down, and everybody was mad, you know. But so that helped me to be a little more gentle in my approach, and so I want to thank y'all for that insight there. So let's continue to look at. I was wondering if we talk a little bit about the peculiarity of people of color and people who may be often marginalized. Any things that we need to be more aware of in that, let's say, particularly this audience that help make us see why it's so important even as we sit with each other.
One of the things you mentioned when you first started was about stressors of just being of a certain color. Having more melanin in your skin brings more peculiar struggles. And because of that, there are some uniquenesses that only people of color can understand. And in that, because I've had so many people who would call me, email me, saying that they were looking for a particular kind of therapist, simply because they could understand some of what they're dealing with. That doesn't mean that, you know, any other person is less qualified, but those things that a person of color deals with, race-based trauma, for instance, that's something that if you are not a person of color, even though you may be an ally, that you really don't understand, because you can't put yourself in that position, right? And there's nothing wrong with being an ally, but there are just certain things that some people understand better than others, simply because of experiences. We talk about, you know, how some colloquialisms, you know, that some people may have. And I had someone say to me that they said a phrase to one of their therapists, and the therapist was like, what does that mean? You know? And at that point they were like, okay, this is not the therapist for me, you know? Only because they wanted someone who could really understand. And so the mental health concerns of those people of color, they're very unique because you have a group of people who have been for generations been marginalized. Where people are right now, that they're still not having access to certain things, financial and health wise and educational wise, and so there's a hard struggle there. It's a harder struggle. I was just going through a training these past 5 weeks, and they were doing a privilege walk. And you do that, and you really see how privileged you're not, as someone who has more melanin than the next person. And so you have to really first understand that it's real, that there's nothing political about it. There's nothing, this is real. There are real inequities out here when it comes to mental health concerns and any other type of concerns when it comes to people of color. And you just have to say, yes, it is what it is. But then you have to be one of those to say, okay, what can I do to help to fix it? What can I do to help to bridge that gap? I could talk forever about this, and I'm not going to, but you really have to say, yes, it's real. It is real.
We will in a second. I'll open it up.
So we have a community well-being survey that's conducted frequently, and we were examining some of the data for that with the health department of the hospital, and just looking at what's reported in the survey and the differences of perceived well-being, perceived feelings of either depression and anxiety, or have you had trouble enjoying life, say, because sometimes people frame it differently. People may not identify depression or anxiety, but they can identify that they haven't enjoyed life like they used to, and that the percentages were higher, during the pandemic, but for persons of color, were even higher, or the enjoyment of life was less. So that we do have some real data on that. Also, indications that they hadn't been able to get the care they needed, they don't have someone to turn to, or that there's feelings of bias or discrimination, which is very, very concerning to me from a public health perspective. It's something that I feel very strong. So those are some real data.
Okay, you were going. We had a question, or you want to react?
Probably should react.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to just piggyback off what Ms. Ford said. I have a therapist, right? And I went through some of the exact same, how do I find my therapist? Because I'm in the church, they have to be religious. Because I'm a person of color, I would like them to be a person of color. Because there's some things that I say, as you said, when I say, oh man, or girl, there's little things that many people of color say that other people of color can quickly pick up on. And I didn't want to have to go backwards and explain certain things of why did you say that? Why did you say this? So I did do I got to find the right therapist. And I had a therapist because being a Black man in corporate America, it is hard. I tried to get a therapist when I was way back in the day because trying to climb up the ladder was a lot of challenges. And they can't see you as having anything mental, anything unstable, or your success of going higher. You can't go to HR with that. Stop right there. Can't go past this level. And there are corporations out there who still say that, even though they say HR is this and HR is that. They sometimes will look at it and go, well, he has a problem or something. I'm so glad that, you know, one of the companies that I'm with now support mental health and everything else. But men, Black men of color, face even a bigger stigma because we're supposed to be the breadwinner. We're supposed to be the strong one. We're supposed to be all of this. And for a Black man trying to find a therapist, it's hard. It's really hard. And I commend each of you for talking about this, because I hope there's someone on the line that says, you know what, I was gonna get a therapist and I couldn't find the right one. They're out there. But when you find one, make sure that they're in your niche that you need them for.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree with a lot you said. However, I think, well, I'm going to say it like I really feel it. Some of the things you said, I really think is unfair. It's unfair to God, it's unfair to the church, it's unfair to some of the parents. Some of the stuff children go through or the families go through have been put on us by society. Society have, especially people of color, we have been, you talk about the church beat them down? No. God's word doesn't change for anybody. You, me, or anybody else. He won't change his word. He is God that has made us and not we ourselves. And first of all, religion is something different than a relationship. Yes, maybe some pastors say to talk about the lemonade, but most time pastors already know the people were loud, laughing, cutting up, making a whole lot of enjoyment for good. And time the service comes and sit there like this. They don't, you know, so that's fine. That's what they want to do. So if he or she said that, I don't know, I don't care who it was, I don't want to know. But in the meantime, I don't think you should criminalize that pastor, because maybe he knew why he was saying that to try to get them to respond. The word of God does say to us, fret not yourself, worry about nothing, but everything through prayer and supplication, make your request be made known unto God. Either we believe that or not. We believe God didn't send us to be the oppressed or depressed. We do get that. Lest I know people are depressed and oppressed. But that ain't what God said for us to do. So we either gonna, if we're gonna be clergy, I think we need to tell them the truth of what the words say in love. Yes, it's the way you say it. It's the spirit that you say it in. It's the actions that you do. You need to support your people. Let them know you love them. Let them know you're concerned about every aspect of their life. Let them know you're there for them. But the church, again, as we say, has been so starch to certain churches didn't want the prostitutes. They didn't want the drug addicts. They didn't want the drug abusers and the drug sellers. They didn't want them in their church because that was stigma. Oh, I'm on them here. Let them go over there to Sabbath Suit Church. So some of that. But our political, we're going to say that our society have beat down people because we have not been allowed. We didn't make the money. We did the same job and made less money. We went to, when we had welfare, it was welfare. When they got welfare, it was called something different. So let's don't blame it all on the church. Let's blame it all on society. That's why mental health and Black folks usually kill themselves. Years ago, it was very seldom you heard that. You know why? Because as you say, They were built up. They were taught. They were encouraged. Now, everything we hear is not going to be what we want to hear. You're not going to tell your children everything that they want to hear, but you need to tell them the truth. No pastor's going to always say what somebody wants to hear, but we need to tell the truth in love and tell them we're there for them. Because the truth is either God going to be God and let him be God, or we are all the liars. And we all perpetrate the fraud. So let's don't, like the preachers, always got to, listen, I love my son. This is my son right here. That's Johnny C. Bush. This is another one, my son. Listen, I love them. I appreciate them. I honor them. I don't agree with everything they said, but because I don't agree, that don't mean I don't support them. Because I don't agree with everything they say or do, doesn't mean I don't encourage them and love them. So we have got to not like, listen, we got to be careful what we're saying and what we're doing about. When it comes down to God, listen, as far as I'm concerned, he is God. What he says he meant, he said within it, but we have got to learn, as you said, Lady Ford and everybody, we got to learn how to present God. And listen, a level way don't mean you don't tell the truth. Because anybody don't tell the truth is not loving. They're deceitful, and God don't like deceit, and neither do any of us. We don't even like deceitful attitudes. We like people to tell us the truth. We might not want to hear it, but I'd rather you tell me the truth, and I know where you stand, and we can work with that, than for you to tell me one thing and turn around and do another. So all I'm saying tonight is that this is a good subject. It's needed. But I don't want us to put our guard down at no time. The truth is the truth. He tell us don't be anxious. He tell us don't worry. He tell us don't be, his word tell us that. You know why? Because if everybody would do what God's word tells us to do, we wouldn't have all this oppression, depression, discouragement, because we all would be working towards helping one another.
When we talk about mental health and religion, there is a large spectrum of what people believe, even what clergy believe when it comes to mental health. But I think it's something that we ought to focus and concentrate in on is that sometimes our health issues, our mental health issues, there are issues that are because of chemical imbalances. That is just not all just a worry. And no matter how much you pray, prayer isn't going to help. Sometimes you need Jesus in therapy. Sometimes you need Jesus in psychology. Sometimes you need Jesus and some type of medicine to regulate you. But we have to be open enough, I think, as clergy to say, listen, because you see someone with mental issues does not mean that they are weaker. It doesn't mean that they don't have enough spirituality. It doesn't mean that they're less than anyone, than any of you that's out there. But it means that they understand that just as important as your body, how important it is to keep your body whole and healthy, so much more is it important to keep your mind healthy. Because if your mind isn't healthy, it affects everything else.
That's why he said, let this mind be in you as also in Christ Jesus.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about trauma. And first of all, I want to make a comment. All of those people that you talked about are beaten down by the church, the prostitutes, the drug addicts. I think that it's really telling that those are the people that Christ ministered to. Those were the people that he had around him most of the time. Those are the people that he came for. And that's us, right? But the issue of trauma actually, let's say something, I've had a number of traumatic events in my childhood. And so they not only affect my mental well-being, they affect my physical well-being, but guess what? They affect my genetics. And so when I have children, I pass those genetics on to them. So they may not have suffered the same trauma that I suffered, but genetically, they have that coding. And so we can provide them with an environment that protects them from those it's epigenetics. So I can protect them from having those switches switched on. Or actually, I can provide them with an environment that exasperates it and causes them to experience depression and anxiety because of things that I experienced in my life. And I'm not just talking about maternal depression and anxiety. So I think it physically is encoded in your DNA. You pass it on from one generation to the next. And does it have a cumulative effect? Yes. I don't know how many generations before it, it begins to dissipate. But I think that that's really important for us to acknowledge, because it is biochemical. It is in your genes. It is physical. It's not just, I have a bad mental attitude. So I think that that's how we need to think about it if we're going to get rid of the stigma of mental illness.
So basically, well, that discussion obviously generated a whole lot when we talked about the peculiarity of how race gets factored in, or if there's a specific cultural factor. And so now you're raising something about being clear about how we understand mental illness when people are really need health care. That is a different issue, and it is a little different from because you're not smiling today, or you're not happy for whatever reason. It's not quite as simple as I don't have no money in the bank today. Those kinds of things. All of us could be sad that my bank account is at zero, but that's a different story from someone who it doesn't have to be their bank account. It's not prompted by those kinds of things. But you're talking about what's going on in us, in our body chemistry and so on, that needs work, needs help. And that is a little harder for us. And I think particularly in our churches, we don't always know what to do with that. And sometimes we have gone the route of, we maybe demonized it. We call it demons and stuff like this. Now, not to say that I can't say I don't believe in all of this stuff of, Jesus, being in the exorcism, casting out devils and all this. But the reality is, so I think we have done a lot of disservice to a lot of our people, because we have told them come to the altar. We have put our hands on people that needed a doctor. We have put oil on people that needed a doctor. And when I say a doctor, I'm talking about a psychologist, a psychiatrist, somebody who understands what's going on. And we've been prayed and hollered over a lot of people, and they are still not where they need to be. And so this is our opportunity for us to see better. And how do we see? What is it that we're looking for? That we know this is past my prayer. This is past the altar. Even though we're going to pray, even though we're going to sit with them, even though we're going to support them, but this is past and beyond what I'm capable of. And I don't know if you all have any thoughts, reactions to any of that.
And this is definitely never to villainize the church. I love the church.
Well, I villainize the church because I'm in the church. And I have no problem villainizing the church.
But it's not about villainizing it. It's just about telling the truth.
That's what I mean.
And so, being able to see what is so that we can do something about it. you know. And Mother, I do agree with you that society has a huge part in everything that people of color are dealing with right now. And we need to have another conversation about that. So clergy, y'all go ahead and get that together. Okay. Mental health and the role of society. But until we can recognize and admit that, yes, this has been what has happened or is happening, then we cannot do something about it. So I agree with you about what you just said.
So I think that also in response to your question, how do you know, we've prayed, we've laid hands on you, we've prayed, we've exorcised those demons out of you, and still you present the same way. Maybe that's a pretty good indication that this is more than just a spiritual matter. That might be the spot at which you say, I think that, we need a therapist. We need maybe the eyes of a psychiatrist. We need maybe a doctor, because a lot of times physical issues, present in some of those same ways. So I think that it really is taking that holistic approach. And I'm not going to say that prayer doesn't have a place there, because I think prayer has a great place, especially when it comes to anxiety, right? But I think that maybe that's when you come.
Yeah. I think people that have that hope, do better. But I think the same. But I think, though, getting back to the ask for when do I know, it's not enough, and what do I do about that? And that's the kind of training that we're beginning to, put out to you all, to the community, to say, to give you that information.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I guess my first question would be, when you are speaking of people of color, who are you actually referring to? Because all people of color have not necessarily had our experience. But secondly, the question would be, it should be noted, the doctor was talking about trauma. I'm talking about generational trauma that certain groups have not been able to overcome. And it just begins to grow and grow and grow and grow. We as Black people are considered perhaps the most religious people in the United States. And so we don't have to worry about the church not doing its job. It's perhaps we need to understand that the church is not the healer of the diseases that we are suffering from, that are now embedded in our DNA. Okay, and so where do we go from there? Where do we, let us actually put a face on it. I don't like being called a person of color, because you throw me in a cauldron mixed with other persons that you now identify as people of color. And now suddenly I'm known. I'm just a great big mess, boiling mess of different colors, and no one is actually, even though the flavors might be nice, you're no longer standing alone, okay? And so how do we deal with generational trauma? Why don't we admit that we're suffering from generational trauma? I was extremely disturbed when they were taking the little Hispanic children from their parents. And the first thing they said was, gee whiz, they're going to suffer from this for years and years and years. And we have no idea when this trauma will end. Well, can you imagine the fact that even in 2022, as Black people, there does not appear to be any end to the trauma that we are suffering? So what do we do? First, recognize it, I guess, as the doctor stated, recognize it as what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we cope with trauma, first of all, I think that there needs to be a focus on building resilience. But that's a topic for another day. But also, when you think about trauma, or you're thinking about society, it can make you angry, it can make you depressed, it could lead to a whole host of other issues. But I think that we have to get to a place where we acknowledge it, and where we say, what do we need to do now to move forward? So whether it's a group of people or an individual, what is necessary? What kind of changes are necessary? How do we go about making those changes? Is there, so that's a really broad question, right? The other thing is there a means of working together? Because, anger kind of like splits us. And so I think that, is there forgiveness that needs to be had? Is there reconciliation? Exactly what does that mean? And then how do I exercise control over the situation? What can I control and what can I not control? And so I think that even sometimes when you protest something, and I'm talking about peaceful protests, that at least you feel as though you are active and you have a voice and you might be effective in, bringing some change about. Those are all ways that are very helpful in that trauma recovery. Otherwise, one of the worst things that happens, the thing that causes trauma is feeling totally at a loss. No control over your environment. Something happens suddenly. I have no control over what happened, and it's exceeded my capacity to deal. So I think that the question is, what does it take to overcome those traumas and to build resilience? That's a big question.
Yeah, it's and when you talk about the cauldron of putting all people of color into one, we do have to recognize that if you do have more melanin in your skin, that you will have those different lived experiences, and there are Black people that have different experiences than Hispanic people, who may have different experiences than people from the Middle East. But yet we have something in common, that we're having these experiences nonetheless. And so, I know that we only had, an hour to talk about this? Hour and a half. Well,
I don't know what time.
We're quickly approaching.
7:12.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, when we speak about the trauma that has occurred for generation and generation, and what society has heaped upon us, and what our culture has absorbed through some of this trauma, and when we talk about all of that and what can we do, we are still, like you said, in 2022, still dealing with the trauma that has for generations plagued us. And what do we do? One of the simplest answers is we do the best we can do. And what does that look like? That looks like whatever it looks like for you. It could be the peaceful protest. It could be being a CEO. It could be being a pastor. It could be sitting in your office, Googling, stuff all day. Whatever it is that's helping you to cope with whatever you're dealing with. And so, I know that we want these answers of, well, what is it that we can do? I wish I had them. Because if I did, then some of these things that have happened over the past 2.5 years that have gotten lots of press would not be happening. Breonna Taylor would not have happened, and George Floyd would not have happened, and Uvalde would not have happened, and El Paso would not have happened. And even being the highest, having the highest office in the land, in the world, and not getting respect, that would not have happened. And so you try to figure out, what is it that I can do? You do what is best for you at that moment. And I wish to God that I knew. I really do. I wish that I knew what to do. But you do the best that you can do at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
The best that you can do, sometimes being a person of faith, means that all I can do right now is get on my knees and pray. And you know what? That To me, that's my place of control. I have a direct line where I can make my needs known, and I know that I have a Father who's faithful to hear me and who's not going to forget any of my prayers long after I've forgotten them. And so I think that's where faith, pulls you through. And I think that that's an important place for us. So maybe that's a place where you teach children resilience.
Mhm.
Do you have any other questions?
Yes.
So my question is, what's the plan for mental health awareness? Like, how are we going to take like a whole stronghold on this? Because I've noticed that a lot of our community members and a lot of our generations are going through a lot of painful experiences, traumatic experiences at that. So I'm wondering what really is the plan. I mean, we can talk about this, but when are we going to implement something for the and for our peer groups in order to help each other out so that we can build a more sense of community so that everybody feels more united instead of divided?
Yeah.
Joe.
So we have formed a youth mental health for young people. We have formed the Youth Mental Health Alliance, and many of the people here are involved with that to promote wellness, mental wellness, and well-being. And it is a community approach. It's absolutely a community approach. It's a public health issue that really needs a common solution. So some of the things are working with those groups that touch children and families to ensure they have the skills that they need to be able to support effectively, know where to refer, have referral sources available for people in the community and for those that are helping others, to give more trainings, and to have a campaign, a communication campaign that does reduce stigma, let people know it's okay to ask for help, where to ask for help, and that we are all working together. We recognize it, and we're working together as a community to solve it. And that's how we can do it. It's longer, and I know it's urgent, and we feel this need to fix it very urgently. But in order to create a more systemic solution, we need to work more upstream, get more prevention, more early intervention, so that we're not always handling crisis. So that is what we're really trying to do. So the Department of Health and the VITA Health and Wellness Partnership that many agencies are partners within, the hospital and the mayor's office. We are really all committed to this work, and I want it to be actionable. We really want to do, not just talk. And we do have a very concrete plan that we're putting forward. So we have already done some activities.
I'd like to also add to that. While this may just seem like it's a conversation, it is what I would say continuing education for us. Because if we're not educated to see and know better, we're not going to do any better. And when will our congregations talk about mental health? When will we say that word? When will we use that word from a pulpit and help our people to see? And so I think this is a part of where you're asking, what is it? I don't see this as just a conversation. We have some skilled people who know something here to help us look at this, to talk about it, because we're going to have to talk about it when they are not here. We're going to have to do something when we see it in each other. And so some of us have sat and some of us have been going through the trainings and stuff like this so that we can see a little more. And hopefully, just as you're raising, I'm hoping that persons like yourself will join whatever trainings that we have or whatever is available. And for those of you who are watching as well, that you'll get yourselves involved because, again, this is not a sprint. It's a marathon. And we can't fix things, as Jody said, all overnight. And we don't want to just be so reactionary, but we want to try to infiltrate systemically a way to reach people. And so I really appreciate that question, because I don't want us to just be blowing hot air either, as much as I want us to really get to the nitty gritty. And this is nitty gritty stuff, because, you know, I'm a pastor and I can critique the church as much as I want. And I know that many of us, I'm not against prayer, I'm not against Bible study, I'm not against worship, but many of our churches have only emphasized those things as if that's the answer to the needs of our people. And a community around us is falling down, crumbling down. And that is not the gospel. The gospel taps into poverty. The gospel taps into people who are bound and held hostage in prison. That's what the gospel is about. So when we start at that space and that place, we start reaching out and doing the work. Our hands are the hands of the Lord. Our feet are the Lord's feet. That's why we're the body. And so I'm really appreciative of what I'm learning, what the conversation has been. It elevates us. And I as a pastor, I know better than to just somebody come in and they tell me, you know, I've been thinking about killing myself. Come here, let me just lay hand on you and then let them go home. I know better than that now. And I'm saying, but some of our churches don't. And some of us are still under that kind of perspective. It's all religion. And that is a hazard to me. And I'm grateful for what y'all are sharing today. I don't know if there were
well, in the trainings that we've been alluding to, they're free. So if anyone would love to be a part of that, and you clearly have an interest in it, we would love for you to be a part of it. Even those who are watching on the various platforms, if you would like to be a part of it, just, you know, if you're here, you can come up to one of us and say, hey, I want to be trained, or I got somebody who wants to help out. Or if you're on one of the platforms, just type it in the chat and say, you know, hey, I want to be trained. Again, it's free, and it really, really helps the community because, like Pastor Bush said, that we're clinicians and we're working in our offices every day, but y'all are out in the community every day. And so we need more people in the community who can recognize these struggles that everyone is having. Because like I said before, you know somebody who's having a struggle, or you're that somebody that's having a struggle.
Quick question, two questions really. Number one, how are we getting the communications out about these services? But then what other resources are there here in Stanford for individuals who may need to seek help? I know, Jody, you would be the best to answer this question. I know that there's the hub, but can you give us some resources for those, and then how are we getting that communication out?
So one of the first things that was done was develop a resource page. It's on the city website. And it was brought to my attention by some community members that not everyone may necessarily go to a website, or if you're in crisis, they may not, be able to do that, to have something printed. So we have printed material that we're developing with a list of resources. But right now, There are many resources listed on the city website, on the Department of Health website. And so that's one way. I think through schools can offer resources to our youth and families. And there are agencies in the community that are connected to this work. But I know we need a good approach to getting that out in multiple ways and in multiple languages. And that was the resources. The other was hearing about the trainings, was your question?
Yes.
Okay, so we will be having more information coming regarding the trainings. We are meeting with community members to find out, and agencies to find out what their needs are, what trainings they're interested in, or what types of programming they're interested in. So we are reaching out to those groups that work with. Our focus through the Alliance is youth, but of course, youth are connected to families. So that's how we're doing that right now. So it is an intense outreach that we're conducting, and then there will be as I said, a communications campaign forthcoming.
And even if you're not attached to an organization or an agency and you want to have some input, let us know, because we really need all of the community involved in this.
The pastors here know how to get to me, Milan, and we're connected, and we can make arrangements to have that done, or let folks know when the trainings will be occurring. If it's going to be done with a group, it can be open.
And I would always add, if it's a real serious crisis that you don't know what to do, but you yourself feel that I can't let this pass, I'm going to need to call someone. It's always good to call and get the help you need from someone. In some cases, you may have to call 911.
Well, actually, there is a number now, 211, but also 988 has been developed. We've been told recently that we were able to put this information out. There was some concern that to ensure that the state of Connecticut was ready, that we would have help on the other end when you call, and we've been assured of that. So that is going to be a number. Instead of calling 911 for mental health kinds of support, you can call 988, and that will get you to the help you need. And 211 is also out there. They're working in conjunction. 988 is connected to 211.
I think also most doctors have screeners. So if you go in for a physical, if your only access is to a general practitioner, they do have screeners that a lot of people have been trained to use. And so they can make referrals as well.
You had a question?
I just wanted to know, thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for my presentation. I wanted to ask you also, do you have a Facebook page? Do you have it on Facebook? Because a lot of people, believe it or not, that's one of the biggest resources.
Right. We put out information through the Department of Health.
I'm sorry.
We do put information out through the Department of Health, and those like Facebook posts and things like that are often shared with the agencies that are providers or are connected to community, and they put them on their posts. But we don't have one yet for the Youth Mental Health Alliance itself.
Okay.
But those are all the things that are to come. And any other suggestions that people have, we're open to. That's how when the concern, we talked to the Concerned Clergy Coalition, and they said, we would like to have training. And there we were, off to a start.
Thank you.
Okay. How with time? Okay, so I want to thank you all, and for those of you who are in the house, you want to give a nice applause for our panel. And for those of you who have been watching us, we want to also thank you for joining us tonight, and we're grateful. We ask that, yes, be prayerful with us and also join what we're doing in what ways you can. Talk with your spiritual leaders and encourage them and support them in what ways you can. So that we can infiltrate our service, and not just in our churches, but those persons our churches touch, our neighborhoods and communities. We want to try to be there for people as best we can. Thank you all. And so we want to close, and we'll close out in prayer. And I want to again express my gratitude to Bishop Hinton and the Rose of Sharon family for hosting us in here today, and a lovely reception. Also, I think some desserts or something you can go out and give you a little joy, and hopefully without the guilt. And of course, we're grateful for all our clergy, concerned clergy that are with us today. Apostle Streeter, I see Pastor Bradley and Pastor Ford and Bishop Hinton. We're so grateful for all of you, and we know others are joining us on the line as well. So thank you so much. Let us close out now in prayer together. Gracious and eternal God, we're so grateful for the privilege of this space for grace today. We thank you for wisdom, and we thank you for knowledge, and we thank you for understanding. We pray that you will continue to increase us, prepare us continually for service. And oh God, I ask that you would give us what it takes, the resolve and resilience that we so desperately need in times like these, so that we will be there for others. We thank you for each other. We thank you for the resources that we have in our relationships. We thank you now, and dismiss us with your blessing through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.